Hello there and welcome. This is our video lecture on Chapter 5, Population Genetics. My name is Miss Delia, and if you're ready, let's get started with the lesson. So in this chapter, we have two subtopics, which are gene pool concept and the Hardy-Weinberg Law. There's two subtopics, but this is a really short chapter, so we're only going to have one video for the whole of it. There are about 4 learning outcomes in this chapter. In 5.1, you will learn about the gene pool concept, and in 5.2, you learn about the Hardy-Weinberg Law. So this and 5.1a, 5.2ab are going to be covered in this video. 5.2c is something that you will go into and hopefully master through your tutorial exercises. So for this video, we're focusing on these 3 learning outcomes. And of course, let us start with the first subtopic, 5.1 gene pool concept, where you will be able to learn population genetics, gene pool, allele frequencies, and also genetic equilibrium. Now let's go into this subtopic by looking at this picture of all the pigeons in my backyard. So this was taken just a few days ago. As you can see, this is a group of pigeons. They're all the same species. They live near my house, and they look a little bit different from one individual to the other, but you know they are all pigeons. They're all the same type of animal. And in this next slide, you will see those pigeons being chased away by Toby, which is a kitten that lives in my house. It does not belong to me. He lives here and his owner lives with me. Oh yes, so from here, you should be able to tell what is a population. I use that word to describe the pigeons, okay? This is a population of pigeons that live near my house. And if we want to define population, population can be defined as a group of individuals of the same species, live in the same area or habitat, and they can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Going back to this picture for a second, you know that the pigeons are the same population, but this kitten is not part of that pigeon population. This kitten is part of cat population, although they live in the same habitat. So rasanya boleh faham, populasi didefinisikan sebagai sekumpulan individu yang berasal daripada spesies yang sama, tinggal di habitat yang sama, dan mampu menghasilkan anak. Okay, so one more thing that you should remember is members of a population should be able to interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Sekarang kamu tahu sudah apa itu population. Now you already know what is a population. We'll talk about population genetics. So population genetics is the study of genetic variability within a population and the evolutionary forces that act on it. Sebelum ini dalam chapter 4 kita belajar pasal keturunan mengikut keluarga. Okay, so mula dengan parent, generasi pertama, generasi kedua. Untuk chapter 5 kita ikut skala yang lebih besar. So we're using a bigger scale. We're not just looking at one family, first and second and third generation. We're looking at the whole group, the whole population. Where is the allele? Where is the gene? How does it change? And what makes it change? In other words, we can also say population genetics is the study to see how does a population change genetically over time. And you also need to understand the concept of a gene pool. So the gene pool, according to the definition, kalau ikut definisi, gene pool is consisting of the total number of genes and the different alleles that are present in a population at a given time. In population genetics, a gene pool is the complete set of unique alleles in a species or populations. Walaupun definisi dia mengatakan gene pool merujuk kepada semua gene dan allele yang wujud dalam populasi itu pada waktu itu, biasanya bila kita mengkaji population genetik, kita akan fokus kepada satu ciri-ciri dan satu allele. Satu ciri-ciri dan gene dia. So biasanya akan ada 1-2 allele lah yang berkaitan. Okay, so although we're talking about gene pool encompasses all the genes and alleles of that species. When we are looking at population genetic study or population genetic questions, we usually focus on one trait at a time. So, soalan tu tidak akan minta gene A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, Z, K, S, semua. Dia akan fokus kepada satu gene dalam satu soalan. Okay, so let me make this concept of gene pool a lot easier. Okay, so I'll try to explain gene pool in a more simple way. This is a population of butterflies. Butterfly ni ada yang coklat, ada yang orange, ada yang putih. Dan kamu boleh nampak ada dia punya genotype. If you look closer in this diagram, you'll see that there are big A, big A, big A, small A, small A, small A. And I also can write out the text. Okay, saya tulis sudah dia punya genotype di sebelah butterfly itu. When we say gene pool, we are looking at just the genes, just the DNA of that individual. And then we collect them all together. Bila saya mengatakan gene pool, saya cuma tengok gene, allele yang ada dalam populasi itu. Anggap macam kita boleh kasih keluar DNA dia dan kumpul satu kali. Itulah dinamakan gene pool. Dikumpulkan, pooled together. Okay? So, yeah. I'm looking at a gene pool. I'm just looking at the genes. So, each individual will have 2 alleles for that gene. So, every individual contributes 2 allele. Kalau kita mau kira berapa banyak allele dalam gene pool, kita ambil bilangan individu dan kali 2. If we want to look at how many alleles are in a gene pool, we need to take the number of individuals and times by 2. The homozygous dominant individuals, big A, will contribute 2 dominant alleles. The heterozygous individuals, big A, small a, will contribute 1 dominant allele, 1 recessive allele. And the homozygous recessive individuals will give us 2 recessive alleles. Okay, so that will be useful later. Don't worry. We can look at it in the text. Okay, so let's try to calculate one more time. If we are looking at this example, dalam contoh ni, kita ada 10,000 individuals in a population. In this population, a particular character is controlled by a certain gene. This gene consists of 2 alleles. The 2 alleles involved are big A and small a. So, if the question asks you to calculate the gene pool, this is what you do. First, we assume that among the 10,000 individuals, each of them will hold 2 alleles. So, to calculate the gene pool, 2 times 10,000, 20,000 allele. Jarang ada soalan macam ni dalam syllabus terkini, tapi just in case you see this question somewhere, you know this is how you find gene pool. Okay, another thing that you should know about is what is allele frequency. Allele frequency can be defined as the ratio of the total number of a specific allele to the total number of all alleles in a population. So sekali lagi, ini adalah nisbah, ratio. So there's a formula to calculate the allele frequency. That formula is allele frequency equals to total number of dominant alleles over total number of all alleles if you're looking for dominant allele frequency. If you're looking for recessive allele frequency, then it is allele frequency equals to total number of recessive alleles divided by total number of all alleles. Kadang-kadang kita boleh ambil short form, bukan kadang-kadang, selalu kita kasih ringkaskan dia kepada P mewakili frequency of dominant allele. Usually we use P to represent frequency of dominant allele and Q to represent frequency of recessive allele. Okay, let's look at this example. There are 2 types of alleles here, which is big A and small a. Let's try to calculate the frequency of allele A based on this diagram. So if you're watching this, you can pause your video, take out a piece of pen and paper or pencil and paper, and try to calculate the frequency of dominant allele A and recessive allele A. Okay, let's see the work. All right, so to calculate the frequency of dominant allele A, we take the total number of dominant allele A, which is 18. Kalau kamu kira, you will get 18. And the total number of alleles, which is the gene pool. Here, there are 17 individuals, so the gene pool is 34 alleles. To calculate frequency of dominant allele A, also equal to P, it will be 18 divided by 34 equals to 0.5294. Now, frequency, this ratio, can be expressed as decimals. Actually, you should express it as decimals. And if the question doesn't tell you that it wants 2 decimal place or 3 decimal place, then play it safe and put 4 decimal places. Kalau soalan tidak nyatakan dia mau berapa decimal place, kita play safe saja. Ambil jalan selamat, yaitu kita ambil 4 tempat perpuluhan. Okay, so to calculate frequency of recessive allele A, we'll calculate total number of recessive allele A, which is 60, total number of alleles in the gene pool, which is 34, to calculate frequency of recessive allele A, which also equals to small q, equals to 16 divided by 34, becomes 0.4706. I hope that's clear. And this is how you calculate allele frequency when you have the data in a population. Now let's move on to the next slide, which is genotype frequency. Genotype frequency is once again dia nisbah. It's once again a ratio of the total number of individuals with a specific genotype to the total number of all individuals in a population. This also has a formula, and the formula is this. Genotype frequency is the total number of individuals with that specific genotype divided by the total number of all individuals. This one, we also have some letters to represent. Okay, ini pun kita ada huruf-huruf untuk mewakili setiap frequency. Kalau kita sedang calculate frequency of homozygous dominant genotype, then we can use P square. If you are calculating the frequency of heterozygous genotype, you can write it as 2PQ. If you are calculating frequency of homozygous recessive genotype, you can write it as Q square. Okay, now that we've looked at the formula, let's continue with a bit of a calculation. All right, so let's look at the same example once again, same diagram. Now we are looking at genotype frequency. So we have 3 genotypes here, which is homozygous dominant, big A, heterozygous, which is big A, small a, and homozygous recessive, which is small a, small a. Let's start by calculating the frequency of genotype homozygous dominant. So first, we calculate total number of individuals with homozygous dominant genotype. Okay, so homozygous dominant genotypes ni 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 individuals with homozygous dominant genotype. And then we get the total number of individuals. Remember, now we're calculating individuals. And then to get the frequency, which is also represented by P square, we simply divide number of genotype big A over total number of individuals. Since the question didn't say how many decimal place it wants, we give 4 decimal places. And then we try to calculate the genotype for frequency of individuals with genotype heterozygous. Okay, so ini pun 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Total number of individuals still 17, represented as 2PQ, 6 divided by 17, and the answer is the same, which is 0.3529. And last but not least, let's calculate frequency of genotype homozygous recessive. We calculate number of homozygous recessive individuals. In its diagram, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Total number of individuals, 17. Frequency of genotype homozygous recessive, also represented as Q square, is 5 over 17. And you can get the answer 0.2941. Okay, so note that when you're calculating all of this, the genotype and allele frequency is usually expressed as a decimal fraction. and the sum of all the genotype frequencies will be 1.0. Maksudnya kita kira, kita gunakan fraction, jawapan kita dalam bentuk decimal, dan kalau kita tambah decimal untuk P square 2PQ dengan Q square, kita akan dapat nilai 1.0. Sama juga kalau untuk allele frequency, P tambah Q akan jadi 1.0 juga. Okay, and you can use the allele frequency to find the genotype frequency and also to find the phenotype frequency. Salah satu jenis frekuensi ini boleh digunakan untuk mencari nilai yang lain. Okay, you'll be able to see this more clearly when you try to do the exercises later. Right, there is one more term that you need to learn for 5.1, which is genetic equilibrium. Ini adalah keyword yang sangat penting. Genetic equilibrium can be defined as a population whose allele and genotype frequencies do not change from generation to generation. Means, kalau dalam satu populasi itu, kita kira, dia punya allele frequency, dia punya P, pada generasi ini adalah 0.3. Kalau populasi ini ada dalam genetic equilibrium, generasi pertama kah, kedua kah, ketiga kah, keempat kah, asalkan kamu tengok balik, kamu kira balik dia punya allele frequency, dia akan sama juga P equals to 0.3. That means a population that is in genetic equilibrium, there is no net change in allele or genotype frequency over time, and it is not undergoing evolutionary change. It's going to be the same. It's going to look the same. Its DNA is going to be the same now until forever. If there are allele frequencies that change over successive generations in this population, that means evolution is occurring. Kalau dia punya P, nilai P dengan nilai Q dia tiada berubah, maksudnya populasi ini akan sama saja selama-lamanya. Kalau nilai P dengan nilai Q dia berubah, maksudnya populasi ini akan mula berevolusi. A population in genetic equilibrium means that the population is not evolving. It's going to stay the same. Its allele and genotype frequencies do not change. Okay, so that is all the terms that I'm teaching you. Just a quick summary. Ito sahaja untuk 5.1. Dalam 5.1, kamu belajar apa itu definisi population genetics, apa itu gene pool, apa itu allele frequency, dan genetic equilibrium. Kamu sepatutnya boleh jelaskanlah keempat-empat term dan konsep ini. Okay, so you should be able to explain those terms. And let us move on to 5.2. When we talk about genetic equilibrium, which is the last segment in 5.1, we are also relating to 5.2, which is talking about Hardy-Weinberg Law. So, sekali lagi, kita cakap pasal allele and genotype frequency. Okay, so 5.2 Hardy-Weinberg Law, Hardy-Weinberg Law, you should be able to state what is the Hardy-Weinberg Law and also explain the 5 assumptions of this law for genetic equilibrium. Okay, so first let's talk about who are Hardy and Weinberg. So Hardy and Weinberg, or also known as Gottfried Hardy, which is an English mathematician, and Wilhelm Weinberg, who is a German physician. They are two very intelligent individuals who in 1908, if I'm not mistaken, just weeks apart from each other, independently identified a mathematical relationship between alleles and genotypes in populations. Maksudnya, dua individu ini sedang menjalankan kajian pada waktu yang sama, dua-dua pun sedang kira allele frequency, dan diorang perasan, there is a trend. You can make a law, you can make an equation out of this, and the equation can make sense. And also, both of them came up with a similar law or hukum, which can be summarized like this. What does the Hardy and Weinberg law say? Hardy and Weinberg law states that the frequencies of alleles and genotypes in the population will remain constant from generation to generation in a population with genetic equilibrium. Mereka berdua dapatkan hukum ini. In a population in genetic equilibrium, the frequency of alleles and genotype in the population will remain constant from generation to generation. When a population evolves, the allele frequency in the population will change. Sekarang saya bagi ayat begini, tapi biasanya bila kita mau explain apa itu Hardy-Weinberg Law, kita tambah di depan ataupun di belakang. Population in genetic equilibrium or a not evolving population. Sebab ini law cuma apply kepada population yang dalam genetic equilibrium. Again, relating to what I said in 5.1. For us to use the Hardy-Weinberg Law, there are 5 assumptions that need to be made. Hukum ini hanya boleh digunakan kalau 5 syarat ini ditepati. 5 syarat ini adalah, your population must have a large population size. Your population must not have any mutation in that gene. Your population must not have any migration. Your population must not have any natural selection occurring within it. And last but not least, in this population, there must be random mating or random fertilization. Okay, so large population size should be easy to understand. No mutation means kalau kamu punya allele adalah A besar A kecil, itu sahaja allele kamu. Tidak tiba-tiba muncul A huruf kecil X. No migration means if your population lives in Labuan, there is no bird coming in from Sabah into Labuan or from Labuan back into Sabah. Dia tiada migrasi. Or sometimes the books will write, instead of no migration, it may write no gene flow from other populations. No natural selection means that there is no pressure that one phenotype will do better than another. And no random, must have random mating means that all individuals in that population have equal chance to mate with each other. Okay, so this Hardy-Weinberg Law will bring us to the Hardy-Weinberg equation. Ini yang paling penting dalam chapter ni. Paling penting dalam chapter ni adalah kamu patut ingat dan pandai guna Hardy-Weinberg equation, which is which has 2 parts. The first part of the Hardy-Weinberg equation is the allele frequency equation. Allele frequency equation is P plus Q equals 1. And genotype frequency equation is P square plus 2PQ plus Q square equals to 1. This, dua-dua ini, yang purple dan yang merah, adalah Hardy-Weinberg equation. Okay, ini secara ringkas lah. This is why in 5.1, when I was telling you about the allele frequency and the genotype frequency, I was using P, Q, P square, 2PQ, and Q square. Because that is what is being used in the Hardy-Weinberg equation. Now, the Hardy-Weinberg equation is often used as an initial test to see whether evolution is occurring in a population. Kita akan gunakan equation ini, 2 equation ini, ke atas sesuatu populasi yang kita sedang kaji. Kalau kita dapat gunakan equation ini, tekan, P plus Q sama dengan 1, bukan 1.02, bukan 0.98, that means this population is in genetic equilibrium. There is no evolution happening in this population. When we say a population is not evolving, like I said, we should be able to use the Hardy-Weinberg equation to calculate the allele frequencies. That also means that if you're able to use the equation, this population is a large population. There is random mating in this population. There is no migration, no mutation, no natural selection, and that this population is in genetic equilibrium. If your population is evolving, no matter how you calculate, no matter how many times you check your answer will not be able to use the Hardy-Weinberg equation. It can be this population that you're looking at may be a small population, or there may be non-random mating, and there may be mutations occurring, there may be migrations occurring, there may be natural selection, and most of all, this population, if you cannot use the formula to calculate, that means this population is not in genetic equilibrium. Ini adalah maklumat tambahan lah. Biasanya soalan untuk chapter ini memang bagi kamu contoh haiwan yang dalam genetic equilibrium. But in real life, if you ever go out and do your own research on population genetics, I want you to know that the Hardy-Weinberg equation is usually broken or not followed because nearly every single population on this earth is evolving on a small scale. Or maybe even a large scale, I don't know. Okay. Itu maklumat tambahan. Sekarang kita balik kepada contoh yang ada dalam level kamu. We'll go back to examples that you will see in your level. Okay, so let's look at this sample question from 2014-2015. In this question, the body color in fruit flies is controlled by a pair of alleles. The allele for gray, which is big E, is dominant over the allele for ebony, which is small e. In a population of 2,000 fruit flies, 320 of these fruit flies will have ebony body. Assume that this population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. You need to first state the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, 1 mark for this question. Second, calculate the frequencies of big E and small e alleles, 2 marks. And third, calculate the number of heterozygous individuals, which is also 2 marks. Okay? Daripada ayat-ayat dalam soalan ini, kita perlu keluarkan maklumat dan jawab soalan. Alright, so the first question that you need to answer is answering definition. Question asks you to state the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. We will state the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. We will say, in a population that is not evolving, allele and genotype frequency will remain constant from generation to generation. Sekarang kalau tidak silap, kita jawab macam ini saja pun boleh. Tapi kalau ikut silabus lama ataupun skema jawapan yang lama, kadang-kadang soalan minta kamu tambah. When a population evolves, the allele frequency in the population will change. If I'm not mistaken, now the questions only ask for this part. Yang bahagian kedua ni kurang wajib. So ada tulis begini, 1 marka. Let's move on to question number 2. Calculate the frequencies of big E and small e alleles. You cannot start. I mean, you can try. You can try pausing the video and try to answer this question. And then come back. To calculate the frequency of alleles, when you have a question like this, you must always start with the recessive allele. Kita mesti mula dengan Q square. Sebab kamu tidak tahu yang gray body itu adalah homozygous dominant ataupun heterozygous. So we must always start with Q square. Frequency of genotype small e or homozygous recessive is equal to Q square. Q square is the information that we have here, which is 320 divided by 2,000. And we will get 0.16. That is our Q square. Question asks for frequency of allele. So kita cari frequency of allele E is equal to Q. This is where the mathematics come in. Okay, when you look at this, look at it like you're looking at mathematics. Q will equal to square root of Q square. So kita ambil saja Q equals to square root of 0.16, bawa ke dalam. Dia akan jadi Q equals to 0.4. If you're getting confused, please pause the video and try to do this calculation for yourself before you continue with the rest of this. Okay, buat saja macam tu, Q equals to 0.4. Kita ada sudah 1 marka untuk 1 bahagian. Frequency of allele E is equal to 0.4. Next, we will calculate the frequency of dominant allele big E. frequency of dominant allele big E equals to P. So to find P, we can simply use this formula P plus Q equals 1. P plus Q equals 1, P equals to 1 minus Q, P equals to 1 minus 0.4, therefore P equals to 0.6. Therefore, frequency of dominant allele big E equals to 0.6. Bila pemeriksa tanda, dia akan tanda di sini ataupun di sini satu markah, di sini ataupun di sini satu markah. Okay, third part of the question, you need to calculate the number of heterozygous individuals. So to calculate number of heterozygous individuals, we are using this formula. Number of heterozygous individuals is frequency of genotype big E small e times the total number of individuals. Frequency of genotype big E small e also equals to 2PQ. Jadi marilah kita cari 2PQ. Untuk cari 2PQ, kita guna formula ini. Masukkan nilai yang kita tahu tadi, yaitu 0.6 adalah P, 0.4 adalah Q. Put that in, do the maths. Tidak perlu simplify. Bila kita dapat sahaja 2PQ di sebelah kiri, cukup sudah. Jangan pindah itu 2 pergi ke sebelah kanan. Kira, tekan calculator, you will get 2PQ equals to 0.48. Number of heterozygous individuals, sebab soalan minta bilangan individu yang heterozygous. 2PQ times 2000, masukkan nilai 2PQ 0.48 times 2000 equals to 960. So this means that 960 fruit flies in this population are heterozygous. Okay, so if you need to be marked, kalau kamu akan diberi marka untuk soalan yang 2 marka, 1 marka pada jawapan akhir, dan 1 marka untuk tengok kalau kamu dapat cari nilai 2PQ. Kadang-kadang soalan macam ini dia akan minta kamu tulis formula juga. So although the questions doesn't specify that it wants you to write the formula, whenever you start answering, just write it down. Sometimes the formulas also have marks. So to be safe, start with the formula and go step by step. Okay. So dari tadi saya sudah bagi tahu kamu apa itu Hardy-Weinberg Law, apa itu Hardy-Weinberg Equation. Saya bagi contoh soalan. Paling penting untuk kamu ingat untuk bahagian ini, the most important thing that you should know and remember about Hardy-Weinberg Law is you should know how to use P plus Q equals to 1 and P square plus 2PQ plus Q square equals to 1. If you don't remember anything else from this chapter, I hope you remember how to use this. Bukan setakat ingat ya, mesti pandai guna. Alright. So, if you have any questions, now is your chance to ask. You can ask me in the group. You can ask me in the questions below. You can ask me in Google Classroom. You can message me personally. Do not hesitate to ask. Asking means you will get smarter. Alright, so just a very quick summary of this chapter. Memang penghujung chapter sudah mau habis sudah. Dari 5.1, in 5.1, I talk about population genetics, gene pool, allele frequency, and genetic equilibrium. You should be able to explain those. And then in 5.2, we talk about what is the Hardy-Weinberg Law and the Hardy-Weinberg equations, which are P plus Q equals to 1 and P square plus 2PQ plus Q square equals to 1. All right, this is a very short chapter and I hope that you will be able to do the exercise. Setakat baca nota saja, memang nota sangat pendek dan kamu boleh hafal dalam 30 minit. Tapi untuk mahir dalam chapter ini, mesti buat latihan. If you're just reading the notes, you're not doing the exercises, you're not going to understand this chapter. And therefore, what you should do now is you should please access the tutorial questions for chapter 5, answer, complete, and when I do the discussion or when we look at the answer scheme, You will mark it and then submit it in our Google Classroom. Okay. So that's the end of chapter 5. Saya sudah habis buat rumusan, saya sudah ajar bagi rumusan, dan saya bagi tugasan untuk kamu. That's the end. Thank you very much for listening. And please do your exercise. I will see you again soon. Thank you for your time and your attention, and goodbye.